Kate Falcha, welcome back to Irish Granny Helen. It's a continuation of our Saturday book, video number 4, The Mothman Prophecies. We very abruptly stopped mid-chapter because it's a long chapter and I didn't want to run way past an hour. I promised you a UFO witness, and here we go. His name is Ted Jones. He's a very religious guy. He didn't smoke and he didn't drink alcohol. Apparently that was unusual in the 60s. He was urbane. He was intelligent, articulate. He managed an appliance store. God, think of the days when something like that would support a family. How times have changed. So 9:05 in the morning, on January 19th of 67, he was driving to the store, daylight, multi-lane highway. A large object blocked the road. When he got close, he saw it was not a car, but it was hovering about 4 feet off the ground. It was a large metal sphere. It had about a 20-inch diameter, made of what looked like dull aluminum. It had 4 legs with coaster-like wheels, the kind that, it had 9-inch diameter windows on a side and a propeller under the bottom of it. The object was idling, and as he approached, the propeller began spinning faster and faster. It rose up to the sky and disappeared. He got to work, he called the police, the story was in the paper, and the next day he got a very crude note slipped under the door of his house. It said, "We know what you have seen and we know that you have talked. You better keep your mouth shut." And he wrote it off as, local crank bothering him. That same day in the nearby town, Ralph Jarrett, an engineer, was shaving when the phone rang. And it went beep, beep for 2 to 3 minutes when he picked it up, but then it went dead after 2 or 3 minutes. He went downstairs and he read about Tad Jones' UFO sighting. He contacted Jones and he realized that the object had been hovering over a major gas line under the road. Tad got a note number 2, on burned cardboard. It was the same kind of threat, and it said there won't be another warning. Keel talked to Tad later, and Tad told this coming story, that a week after his UFO encounter at the same spot where it had happened, he saw a guy hitchhiking, and he thought the guy was stranded. Different time, different place. He pulled over and said, "Hey, you want a lift?" And the guy waved him on. The next day, the same guy was in the same place. Todd decided not to slow down. But then the guy walked into the middle of the road, and he was very tanned or flushed. Once again, that complexion thing. He wore a blue coat and a cap with a visor. Ted wondered if it was a uniform. He had a box in his hand that looked like an instrument with a dial, like a clock, and he had a wire in his other hand. A later check with the department showed that the gas company employees did not have such an instrument, and nobody from the gas company was there that day. Keel and Mary went and found strange footprints identical to the prints at the TNT site. I don't know how they knew that they'd seen in December. They also saw, they knew it because they look like large dog tracks. The tracks of a 200-pound dog. At the TNT site, Keel didn't think that the prints were related to Mothman, but now he'd seen him twice with weird sightings. He's beginning to think, He made plaster casts, but no wildlife authority was capable of identifying it. They said this was not a dog. I don't know what this was. It was not a dog. Similar tracks often show up in areas of paranormal events. At least in those days. I don't know now. Also, he found one large, naked human footprint. All by itself. Only one. But at a distance, he found prints identical to those found at other UFO sites. The ripple-soled shoes with peculiar spacing and edging. They didn't start or end anywhere. It was very abrupt. There was like suddenly they're in the middle of nowhere on the same sort of ground or snow or mud or whatever it was. Suddenly there were these footsteps, and then suddenly they ended. Later, he saw that they looked exactly like the footprints of the astronauts that left prints on the moon. Connie Carpenter had seen Mothman in November, and frequent weird beeps were heard outside her room. In February of 1967, she was almost abducted. This is really a weird story. She had gotten married in early February. She and Keith had gotten married, and they'd moved across the river to Ohio to a town with a population of 3,000. They had no phone, and their address was not made public. Connie was still in school, I guess high school. I don't know. It doesn't say. And at 8:15 in the morning, on February 22nd, she started to walk to school. Keith had already gone to work. It was a quiet residential street. A large black car pulled up, a 1949 Buick that looked brand new. The driver opened the car and called her over for directions. He was about 25. He was clean cut. He had a colorful shirt, no jacket, and it was very cold outside. He was very tan and had no accent. When she approached the car, he grabbed her. There was a struggle, and she managed to get away. She locked herself in her house, and she was just terrified until Keith got home that evening. She stayed home the next day. At 3:00, someone came onto the porch. There was loud knocking, and then somebody peeked. She waited, and she peeked, and there was nobody there, but there was a note that was slipped under the door that said, "Be careful, girl. I can get you yet." Oh, my God. So they went to the police. Keel, a month later, went to look at the note, but the cops had lost it. The case file only said, this is all that was written on a sheet of paper. This is the only thing they had about this near abduction. Dark Buick, young man. The cop said there's no such car in our town. It must be an out-of-town maniac. I swear to God, that's what he said. They were keeping the house under surveillance, he said, but they didn't know when Connie and Keith immediately moved back to West Virginia. The cops are still sitting outside the house in Ohio. They didn't even realize they'd left. They kept asking Keel if he was from the government. Most UFO reports met with suspicion of government involvement. Keel discussed the real subterfuge of the CIA and the lack of accountability. He historically talks about Watergate, the Bay of Pigs. We don't need to go into that. He didn't believe that these men in black were CIA or government. He said that he thinks that they're imitating what they think would be CIA or men in black, and not doing a very good job. CIA or the government not doing a good job of imitating conventional spy type characters. A few days after Tad, the witness, after his UFO experience, True Magazine did a story that Keel wrote about UFOs. There were lots of drawings in the story in the magazine. They were done by the artist of the magazine, including a drawing of the object that Tad saw on the road. But here's the problem. No one had described this UFO to anyone. Keel had not said anything about it. He had not provided the artist with any kind of description or even knowledge that it existed. He himself had no drawing of it. So that's interesting. Chapter 9, Wake Up Down There. Spring of 1967, young people in a car on Lover's Lane on the back roads of West Virginia, 10:30 in the evening. There was a sudden blinding bluish light, and they thought, uh-oh, it's the cops. But no, it was a big ball of bluish fire hovering alongside their car. It had a low hum. The girl, she screamed, and when she did, the ball backed up a little and the hum went up. Suddenly it was gone. They drove off very quickly, but they arrived home at 12:30. They lost 2 hours. They were freaked out, but they didn't report anything because the girl's dad would have he would have had a fit, I guess. They both woke up badly sunburned. The boy's eyes were so swollen shut for 2 weeks. They had a hard time explaining how they got sunburn in the middle of the night in the winter. Keel met the guy when his eyes were not quite healed. He said, well, you know, something happened. Something happened to them. So what about the lost time? Keel notes that this unknown phenomenon seems preoccupied with ... romantic encounters. And he goes back in time a little bit and he compares it to some older experiences. He said Sir Walter Scott wrote that fairies brought people together in order to be able to watch, and then drove them apart. The Bell Witch of Tennessee, the story that manipulated the love life of a girl very tragically. Brad Steiger, for the longest time, I thought he was talking about the actor Rod Steiger. I said, what's he doing involved in UFOs? It's an investigator called Brad Steiger. He had a number of cases of poltergeists interfering in romances, for example. And I'm using romances kind of loosely. I'm doing a little editing here because YouTube. For example, throwing a groom out of the bed the night of the wedding, throwing glass objects at him. Many UFO experiencers who had contact had their marriages fail. UFO investigators often coupled up with each other. So Keel asks, does this mysterious phenomenon play matchmaker? In 1967 at the UN, a PR guy at the UN named Don Estrella went with Keel to West Virginia because the UN was interested in UFOs. Did we know that? I think that's fascinating. The Secretary General, you thought, met privately with John Fuller and J. Ellen Hynek and Drew Pearson, all famous UFO investigators. You thought told Pearson that after Vietnam, UFOs were UN's number 2 concern in the world. Estrella told Keel this, that he and 4 friends, this is Estrella, the PR guy for the UN, he and 4 friends were in New Hampshire on a country road when suddenly they hit something like an invisible wall. They couldn't see what was there. Their car just slammed into something. There was nothing there. The whole front end got crushed. They were not seriously hurt. It was actually lucky. They weren't going any faster. And they got out and, you know, there's nothing there. They all walked in front of the car. There was nothing there. Then, this is the UN guy. Then he told of visiting a friend who accused Estrella of hoaxing all this. The guy had gotten a call a half an hour before Estrella arrived at his house. Okay, let's get into this. A voice said, "Hello, Don." Estrella's friend told the voice that Estrella hadn't arrived yet. "I'm not Don. He hasn't arrived yet." The voice then began to recite a series of numbers meaninglessly. My friend thought it was some kind of gag, and he hung up. And so Keel asks this guy, have you ever had any weird encounters with strangers? He said, well, there was one weird encounter that really bothered me. It happened around the time of the phone call. I was walking home to my apartment at night. A man was following me. When I looked, he stopped and he gave me a really weird grin. There was an air of evil about him. I cannot pinpoint it exactly. So Keel suggests he might have been some sort of, I'm not even going to go into it, but he uses terminology I can't use here. And the guy said, no, I don't think so. He was short and slight and wore a black coat and black trousers. His face was darkish and foreign looking. I don't know why. That evil grin is burned into my memory. So Keel says a foolishly grinning man is a staple item in psychic lore. Black suited, dark complexion, craggy foreign face. He says, I have been described this so many different times. Then he said at about 8 a.m., March 24th, 1961, town of 300 in Oregon, two women talking on the phone. A strange man interrupted. Wake up down there, he said. Now remember, this was still the days of party lines when more than one house in a neighborhood would share the same phone line. And you had to take turns using the phone. Can you even imagine? We still listen to the neighbors talk. Wake up down there. One of the ladies was offended and she started to, chastise the guy. Then the voice started talking in a foreign sounding language, but the line sounded dead and made that dead noise. And yet this language was going on and the women couldn't hear each other. As soon as he stopped talking, the line came back and they could hear each other again. Same thing the next day at the same time. Wake up down there. And then the phone went weird. Then the voice recited 40, 25, 40, 25 over and over and over. Voices counting off meaningless numbers happened on televisions in the area. A lot of people don't even bother to call the police, he says, about this sort of thing, because what are you going to say? Who's going to believe you, right? What do they care? They usually blame police ham radios, actually, but not because he says it's not possible. You can't blame CB radios. You can't blame the police radio because he explains this. I didn't bother. It's a different kind of broadcasting. He received dozens of letters about voices waking people from a deep sleep late at night, yelling, "Wake up!" or voices reading lists of numbers. Numbers of spoken are always 2 or 3 digit numbers. So somebody was thinking, could these be the number of people? Like you're number 1, I'm number 2, he's number 589, but never went over 3 digits. So all people don't have numbers. That's the logic there. These were Morse code like beeps coming out of people's TVs and radios and telephones. Often, all at the same time. The beeps would start, the house lights would start to flash, the power would fail. Keel told her, go out tonight. This is the woman with the phone issue. Go out tonight with your flashlight and signal to the sky and see what happens. So she did. And a large orange sphere appeared over the house. She signaled it, and it left, but her TV started to beep. Keel said that same things were happening for others in the area. If it wasn't the TV, the phone would ring and no one would be there, or the doorbell would ring and ring and ring. He attributes this to electromagnetic pulses, a spectrum of manifestations that are caused by electromagnetic waves. This is just his speculation. He wonders if a post-hypnotic suggestion with UFO and psychic incidents happen. And I think this is just, I mean, this is early days, so he's still trying to figure this out. Beeps are being used to induce and to end some sort of trance, he wonders. Also, he thinks the numbers that were heard or seen written on UFOs might induce a trance. He cites cases of experiencers going into a trance years later after seeing numbers on an object or a sign, years after their experience. Many blame the government and the military at the time. That was the people to blame. Keel points out that these phenomena predate the government of the United States and the United States Air Force. In 1952, Sonny I can't pronounce this last name, just this guy, reported UFOs to the U.S. Air Force that he had gotten threatening phone calls to shut up about it. But he got the threatening phone calls long before he ever called the Air Force to report it. So that wasn't the Air Force that was threatening him. Even witnesses with no reporting, witnesses of quick flyovers that they didn't mention to anybody, they got harassed. And the big story witnesses got big harassment. Woody, who had to self-publish, wrote a book about these threats that were made by phone to him and to his wife. Now, I have to mention, because Keel talks about it, these are the days when there were publishing houses, a lot of them in Manhattan, and people didn't self-publish their own books. This is unusual. Their house was ransacked, their mail, sending out their mail, they'd go to the post office and drop their mail, and it got intercepted. There were visits at work from men in black. They didn't talk, they just stood there and looked at him. He thought maybe they were mafia. He started to think he was in trouble with the family. They moved often, but this kept happening. His wife was afraid of them, and she was really afraid of Indrid Cole. She told Woody that he was evil. He said that they looked like anyone, and she feared that there were many of them walking amongst us, that they could easily blend in. Keel was struck by Woody's experience. It was more personal and longer lasting than just the usual brief UFO sighting. Woody claimed the UFO trip to Brazil inside a UFO. He said the whole thing seemed disappointingly terrestrial, but he claimed that he got abducted and taken to Brazil. Then he claimed he was taken to Lanulos, Cold's planet, and he said the people, this cracked me up. He said the people were mostly nude. It was very futuristic, an outer space nudist colony. And I wrote, seriously? Woody named a list of ETs that he met, and the names seemed typical for ETs, more fairy-ish, no, atypical for ETs, more fairy tale-ish and less Greek mythology-ish. Woody's stories they often had a fairy tale overtone to them. He had friends who had fairy tale-like experiences. A guy with a girl cousin, they were out sky watching, and they saw red, green, and white lights coming down, and they went in to grill something, and I'm sorry, I misread this completely. They went into a gully. The lights went into a gully near them. There was a bright flash, and their faces tingled, and they smelled something metallic, and they got a small electric shock. He heard voices, but she didn't, coming from this thing. They felt a rap on the window, and there was a man with a red light. Now, I think they were sitting in the car. They're their cousins, There was a man with a red light, and he made a telepathic message to the boy, get out of the car. And telepathically he said, is she your wife? And he said, oh, she's my cousin. And he told her, stay in the car. He took the guy into the woods, and when he returned, he had no socks, no shoes, and no watch. These people knew Woody, and they told him about it, and he told them to tell his ET friends. He took them to tell his ET friends, and the ET friends said, well, they weren't one of our people. Those were bad humans. The next day, after telling his ET friends, he woke up to find that his objects, the guy did, his objects were on the front steps of his house. The socks had been washed, and his shoes and watch were all shined up. Now, they had gotten filthy when he was walked out of the car into the woods. It was through dirt and mud. Keel observed this whole weird thing in how there seemed to be like this dichotomy always set of good guy, bad guy, good guy, bad guy with the ETs. Then he goes on to describe the animal mutilations. Now, if you've read Linda Moulton Howe's books, we did cover her book. Oh God, what was it called? Strange something, or I don't remember what it was called, but we covered all of her books, 2 of her books. She was the original reporter behind all of these things. Reports had been made, but she was the one who brought them all together. You know, laser accuracy, bloodless, internal organs missing with no external incision, a variety of weirdness. He saw them firsthand, and he goes into great description, and I'm not up to it. In 1973, December till end of January of 74, there was a nationwide epidemic of dogs missing. In one small town in Connecticut, almost all the dogs disappeared. There's no evidence. How, who, what? They just poof, gone. I will say this. He didn't mention this, but it occurred to me that in these times, it was not unusual. Your dog stayed outside, ran free, or was chained up. So there's that. The same thing happened in Sweden in 1972. There was a plague of dog disappearances. Keel, in the book, refers to legends from the Middle Ages about vampires. And he says in the 40s in Yugoslavia, there were murders called vampire killings. So these entities, he said, you know, if you go back in time and if you go forward into what's been happening, they seem drawn to blood. These waves of UFOs and mutilations led to an interest in the occult and an increase in paranormal and psychic engagement. Jacques Vallée discusses the explanations that ETs have given that are totally illogical for humans. You'd ask them a question. If you're, you know, an experiencer, you'd ask a straightforward question, you get this weird answer, almost like a riddle. And he says, is this meant to confuse and manipulate people? Here's a weird one. Keel describes March 5th, 1967, a Red Cross bloodmobile full of donations. So they'd go to a community and park and they'd ask for blood donations. They were done for the day. They were full. Their tank was full. And they encountered a large white glow on the road. This is a rural road. It swooped down on them, and as they sped away, it kept up with them. A metal claw, like this, descended from the bottom of it to their top to pick them up. But Suddenly, headlights came the other direction, and the thing flew away. They were in hysterics. They went to the police, and the story was briefly on the radio. It never made it into the paper. Keel later called the Red Cross. This is great. He called the Red Cross in the area, and he asked them if any of their bloodmobiles had disappeared, and they all thought he was nuts. Several nights later, back at the TNT site, police saw a UFO with windows hovering and rocking over a pond. Meanwhile, at the Colorado University, Condon, remember the Condon group? They complained that it was they complained it was like a fire department, that they were always answering false alarms. They'd get called about a UFO, they'd go, there'd be nothing there. He said lights in the sky, the descriptions that he was hearing were most remarkable. I don't believe this is the final conclusion they came to. Ships in the Atlantic, like boats that were in the Atlantic, reported luminous cigar-shaped objects. Kind of reminds me of a Tic Tac, putting out globes of lights that went towards New York City and Long Island. And at the same time, people in New York City and Long Island reported seeing globes of light. Keel saw several himself, and he took many reports of this. One family of 7 saw a circular object land in the woods on Long Island. They saw 2 human-like figures get out from a door, and a big black car drove up, and they got in, and the object flew away. Similar reports are heard globally in other countries. This family was terrified, and it didn't report it until they heard Keel on the radio. Makes you wonder what else didn't get reported, Reports were all over the Ohio Valley, Illinois, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Ohio Valley includes West Virginia. March 12th to 67 in Ohio, a woman and a daughter saw a huge white thing over their car. It had curved wings, 10 feet wide, a head with long hair. It flew off and it vanished. These were very religious people, and she thought she was seeing an angel. Then their TV and telephone at home went crazy. And there was a sudden flurry of UFOs in the area. Mary Hyre said that a higher number of UFOs and many reports of 3 strange men on foot going door to door, selling magazines. They didn't have any magazines with them. They were described as huge, weird. No one had sent for them. No one asked for them. They couldn't say who they were working for. And no one was buying magazines. I still can't wrap my head around the fact that they're answering these doors. Mrs. McDaniel had a weird Men in Black incident where they came to her work, and she reported they had very weird hypnotic eyes and they spoke weird, poor English. Keel got worried that these events were leading up to something happening. They were escalating. They were getting really strange. They were getting brazen in front of a lot of people. Dan Drayson, a public broadcasting laboratory producer, had been planning a UFO special, and he went with Keel, and Dawn Estrella went with Keel too. They hopped in cars and took off on the 800-mile trip to the Twilight Zone, is how he describes it. I hope that's not too noisy. There's some kind of weird... It looks like the cops. So great. Small town. Not much ever happens. Chapter 10, Purple Lights and April Foolishness. Mary Hyre complained of a huge number of 24/7 strange phone calls, no talking, just beeping. Keel was careful not to tell her that this was common for UFO witnesses. He was careful not to disclose any information or facts to interviewees, witnesses, etc. He gave the impression of knowing a lot, people reported, but he didn't tell them anything. He didn't want to be responsible for spreading false stuff. He just wanted to prevent hoaxers and to keep a low profile. He wanted to avoid a panic. He didn't want personal publicity, and he didn't want to add to the controversy or to the nonsense that was out there. His two companions on this particular trip grew more alarmed with every new interview that they did. One woman complained of daily weird phone calls in a foreign language. He took her phone apart and he found a wooden object like a piece of match coated with graphite. They called telephone engineers in and they didn't know what it was. Years later, in a magic store, he saw the exact same thing. It was a cigarette load. It was something you'd stick in a cigarette to make it explode. Ha ha, funny joke. Why was that in her telephone? Who put it in there and why? He took it out when they found it, and the weird calls stopped. Other family members noticed similar phone calls and TV trouble coincided with weird lights passing overhead. Lights of many colors. They saw UFOs with diamond-shaped windows making no noise. Cars near their house stalled inexplicably. Me too. I've had my car stop running, going 50 miles an hour on the freeway. Stopped. Cold. Nothing wrong with it. Took it in. Nothing wrong with it. Yeah. Then they began having poltergeist activity. Me too. This is starting to make me a little, I don't know. Kitchen cabinets would open and shut and slam in the middle of the night. They'd be getting up to the front door ajar in the morning. And it was so funny. The door had been locked and the chain was on it. That, security chain that a kid could break. They heard sounds of pans falling, but there'd be no pans falling, or they'd hear a baby crying. There was no baby. Their daughter described waking up at night to a large, broad man towering over her bed, grinning at her. He was wearing a checkered shirt, and apparently that's significant. She woke her mother with her screaming. Her dad was gone to work. The guy walked around her bed, and she yelled for her mother. Her mother said, "You're just dreaming," but she ran out to her mother. Keel says that reports of bedroom phantoms in checkered shirts are a familiar psychic phenomena. I didn't know about the checkered shirt. He wrote long articles about it before hearing the story from her, so he could add it to his list. And another thing that is often sensed at the same time is the smell of sulfur or heat, just heat. That's old Beelzebub. He thinks that it could be hippopompic state. This is when dream brainwaves overlap with waking. It's like an intermediary state, and you kind of dream while you're waking up. Anyway, his companions went back to New York City, and he stayed in Point Pleasant. Dan, the videographer guy, he wanted to return with a camera crew, so he went back to public broadcasting to get the equipment. He'd seen a UFO with Keel. It was a phantom plane. So that's a thing. So what happens is you see a slow plane going too slowly, making no sound, that disappears into a cloud and either never comes out or it takes way too long to come out the other side. Now, Dan was a pilot, so he noticed the anomalies here. To Keel, it felt like the stories of phantom helicopters and planes. It happened a lot. He felt that what they saw was one of those. He tells a story of such an experience that happened from Canada. A UFO shaped like a saucer turned into a plane. And the people said, we didn't tell anybody, because if we told people, they'd think we were crazy. But we know what we saw. It was several people who saw it. West Virginia had many reports like this. After they left, this happened, March 31st. A glowing object crashed into a small shack where the sheriff's transmitter equipment was stored, and the shack began to burn. But the transmitter didn't burn, but it was broken and kind of melted like it had been hit by lightning. And then the sheriff had no way to communicate. Keel said he wanted to avoid crowds of UFO watchers. They were inundated. So he went to a nearby small town called Gallipoli, which we've talked about. And Gallipoli was not devoid. It had plenty of its own UFO stories. Lights, globes, electrical problems, poltergeist activity, phone trouble, weird TV stuff, babies crying, women screaming. So many UFOs reported over it that one farm got so used to seeing UFOs that there'd be all these UFOs and the farmer just went about his business. Didn't even look up, ignored them. Keel and an officer went to Gallipoli on the night of March 31st. They saw a lit up object in the sky flitting about. They saw two teenagers trying to lure UFOs with a bonfire. So they went over and told them, put the bonfire out because that scares them away. That doesn't attract them. The officer couldn't get his radio to work. It was typical for law enforcement to have electromagnetic interference on their radios when UFOs were around. And local phones were a mess. That's his words, not mine. He and the cop and the teens saw this purple shape hovering over the woods. They were like blobs, and he shone his flashlight. He had a powerful flashlight. He shone the beam at them, and suddenly the whole forest area lit up with a purple glow. No world explanation for it because this area was completely uninhabited. The next night, he and Mary Hyre went to a hill at a higher distance to overlook Gallipoli and the area from the night before. Mary saw a small red light blinking and bobbing and circling fields and woods, and it kept getting closer as it was doing this. They saw that it was a square light. Then they saw that it was actually a red glow coming out of a window in a darker, larger object. They saw a human figure in the window. So Keel flashed a light at it, and it shot into the sky, and the light went out. The next night, up at the same hilltop, they saw many more of the same kind of thing, and he flashed Morse code for descend at this thing. And there were several of them, and he flashed descend, and they did. One by one, they started to descend. But they do this falling leaf motion that I've heard described in other books about UFO encounters. You know how a falling leaf kind of does this kind of thing? Kind of, catching air and then going down. Well, that's how they descended. Mary left, and they were in two separate cars, and she left at 12:30. She had enough. And at 1:35, he saw a circular object descend and pass next to his car, very colorful, all lit up. It had portholes. Then it went off into the trees. Although he was scared of nothing, usually at night, this time he was absolutely terrified. He wanted to run. He thought he heard a weird sound of sizzling or hissing. The next day, his eyes were red and sore, and that lasted for several days. He took notes that night. Interestingly, the moon never appeared. Now, the sky was clear. The night before, the moon was there. They watched it. It wasn't like ready to become a new moon and you couldn't see it. It was somewhere in between. The next night, when it should have been there, it wasn't there. And the night after that, it was back. The next day, he and Marion, the cop, returned to look for the object that had gone into the trees. The cop's radio turned itself on without the necessary key that needed to be stuck into it to turn it on. They found no physical evidence of the object. Keel began to realize the object was much bigger and much farther away than they had thought. They couldn't tell distance. More sightings happened in April between the 2nd and 3rd, and they were seen by a large group of people that included state cops. He returned to this area every night, and he saw lights and objects every time. It always began with the same object in the same place in the sky, like a star, only it showed as a star below the clouds. So it was a star, but it was in the wrong place. These stars, they remained fixed all night. So you would see these lights, but they didn't change as, night progressed. They didn't rotate with the sky. Then they'd begin to move in all directions. Suddenly, they would dim, go out. If a plane came by, like they were hiding. They avoided. Lights shone on them. They were impossible to determine size and distance. They were too quick. They got away. Then, one day, Mary told him what she saw the night that she left at 12:30. Remember, she went home. She saw a big globe of bright light on the river. And she says, it's funny, I've been intending to tell you for days, but I keep forgetting that I saw it. Every time I try to remember it, I can't remember it. This is amnesia that's very common with this kind of phenomenon. Mary was told by a woman that she wanted to talk with Keel, but she wanted to remain anonymous. So they're going to call her Mrs. Bryant. Mrs. Bryant was suspicious and secretive at first when they got together. She had told cops about her experience, and they made fun of her. She was afraid to tell Keel that he would make fun of her too. She said, last November, I was behind this building getting ready to go home about 8 o'clock. Suddenly there was a flash like a camera flash directly above me. I saw a flying machine. I was frozen with fright. This thing landed in the parking lot, not 20 feet away from me, a big cylinder. It didn't make any noise. It drifted and stopped. Like I said, I couldn't move. She said I started to pray. 2 men came out of it and walked over. Then she stopped talking and she looks at Keel like, okay, now the ridicule is going to start, right? But he just asked, what did they look like? Here we go again. They were normal size, normal looking, but their skins were a funny color. Like maybe a tan, but not really. Their faces seemed pointed noses, pointed chins, high cheekbones. There was kind of an evil look about them. I felt like I was going to be robbed. How were they dressed, he asked. They were wearing some kind of coveralls, like a uniform. Then they started talking. What did they say? They just wanted to know my name, where I was from, what I did for a living. Sometimes it's hard to understand them. Their voices were sort of sing-songy and high-pitched. It's like they'd listened to a record player at the wrong speed. And they kept asking me for the time. What is your time? What is your time? 2 or 3 times. Then they walked back into the thing and flew away. She said, I decided not to tell anybody. But then I heard the other story about that guy and Woody, and I felt like I could tell you. He says, well, do you know Woody? She says, no, I just heard him on the radio. I was wondering, did he ever see those men again? And Keel says, yes. And she said, well, I saw them again. I saw them in broad daylight, walking down the main street, dressed in normal clothes. They nodded at me when they passed by. And I got scared all over again, real scared. And that's why I went to the police and told them what I saw, and they laughed at me. Poor woman. Let's see, where am I? Then she adds to the story. She tells Keel that she owns a little land and she has cattle and they've been mutilated. She saw tall men in white suits at a distance near the dead cattle and she ran towards them. They ran away. Then her house burned down, but then one night they built a house on the same site. One night she had paralysis while she was in bed in the new house, felt a huge heat. The kitchen door that was locked opened. A tall, dark figure walked in, walked across the house, and out the other door. But here's where it gets weird. No, if that's not weird enough. The family heard all these strange sounds in the house, and her son later confirmed the story. They said they'd seen a large glowing object over the trees. Their phone went dead often. They heard weird steps, weird beeps, weird calls, gray flying boxcars over the house. Okay, so here's what's really creepy. The figure that walked in the locked kitchen door, walked across the house, walked out this other locked door. That locked door was kept locked because it opened onto a 10-foot drop. And animals in the area kept disappearing. So Keel went to the cops to ask about the report she tried to make. And the cops' attitude was, oh, that poor woman, yeah, she's always seeing crazy things. That's it. That was the end of that. So I'm gonna end this here. This is the end of video number 4. We'll be back. Strange, huh? Strange, very strange stories. We'll start. Oops, did I do that wrong? Yes. We'll start video number 5 next time. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. Tell your friends to watch. Be sure you're subscribed. Be sure you hit the buttons. And I don't know what else anybody can do to try to encourage people to find the channel. They're being hidden. I won't go into it. Thank you for watching. Slangafora. Slanja.